Imagine a kingdom drowning in extravagance, where the rich feast while the poor starve. This was France in the late 18th century, a nation teetering on the edge of a cliff. One nation demanded freedom and set fire to an empire built on privilege. This is the story of how a spark of anger became a revolutionary fire that would change the world forever. Welcome to the French Revolution. The seeds of revolution were diving deep into the final years of the Ancien Regime, the Old Order. France, under King Louis XVI, was a paradox. On one hand, it was the cultural heart of Europe, a beacon of fashion, philosophy, and art. The court at Versailles was a glittering spectacle of unimaginable wealth. But beneath this shimmering surface, the foundations of the kingdom were rotting away. The country was broke. Decades of lavish spending by the monarchy, coupled with costly wars, including their support for the American Revolution, had plunged the national treasury into catastrophic debt. To make matters worse, a series of bad harvests led to widespread famine. The price of bread, the staple food for the common person, skyrocketed. People were literally starving in the streets, while the aristocracy and the clergy, the first and second estates, lived tax-free, enjoying their inherited privileges. This glaring inequality bred a deep and simmering resentment among the Third Estate, which comprised over 97% of the population, everyone from peasants and city workers to merchants and lawyers. They bore the entire tax burden, but had virtually no voice in how the country was run. It was a system designed to keep the powerful in power and the powerless in their place, but something was changing in the minds of the people. A powerful intellectual movement was sweeping across Europe, the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Rousseau, Voltaire, and Montesquieu championed radical new ideas of liberty, equality, natural rights, and government by the consent of the governed. Their writings, once whispered in Parisian salons, were now being discussed in cafes and public squares. People began to question the divine right of kings. They started to wonder, why should we be ruled by a monarch who answers to no one but God? Why are some born to rule and others born to serve? This intellectual awakening provided the language and the justification for revolution. Faced with financial collapse, King Louis XVI was forced to do something a French king had not done in 175 years. He called a meeting of the Estates General in May 1789. This was an assembly representing the three estates, supposedly to approve new taxes. But the Third Estate arrived with a much bigger agenda. They weren't just there to talk about taxes. They were there to demand fundamental political reform. The problem was the voting system. Traditionally, each estate got one vote. This meant the first and second estates, the clergy and nobility, could always outvote the Third Estate, 2-1. It was a rigged game. The representatives of the Third Estate, realizing they would be silenced yet again, made a bold move. They declared themselves the National Assembly, the true representatives of the French people. When the king tried to shut them out of their usual meeting hall, they gathered at a nearby indoor tennis court. There, on June 20th, 1789, they took the famous tennis court oath. They swore a solemn vow not to disband until they had written a new constitution for France. This was a direct defiance of royal authority. It was the moment a legal debate turned into a revolutionary act. The king had lost control. As news of this defiance spread through Paris, the atmosphere in the city grew electric. Rumors swirled that the king was gathering troops to crush the new National Assembly. Fear and anger gripped the population. The people needed weapons to defend themselves, and they knew just where to find them. Their target was a formidable medieval fortress in the heart of Paris, a symbol of royal tyranny and oppression: the Bastille. On July 14, 1789, an angry mob of ordinary Parisians stormed the Bastille. The battle was bloody and chaotic, but in the end, the people triumphed. They tore the fortress down, brick by brick. The fall of the Bastille was more than just a military victory. It was a monumental symbolic event. It showed that the people, when united, could overcome the power of the king. July 14th became, and still is, France's National Day. A celebration of the moment the people took their destiny into their own hands. In the wake of this uprising, the National Assembly moved quickly to solidify the revolution's principles. On August 26, they issued a groundbreaking document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, and of the citizen. Inspired by the American Declaration of Independence and Enlightenment philosophy, it proclaimed that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. It asserted principles of liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. It declared that sovereignty resided not with the king but with the nation itself. This declaration effectively dismantled the entire ideological structure of the old regime. The concept of subjects loyal to a king was replaced by the idea of citizens with inalienable rights. The king was still on the throne, but his absolute power was shattered. The revolution had begun, but the journey ahead was fraught with danger, division, and bloodshed. The fall of the Bastille was just the first tremor of an earthquake that would reshape France and the world. The call for liberty had been answered with rebellion, but what would it cost to build a new nation from the ashes of the old? We saw a nation ignite with the promise of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Bastille fell, and the old order trembled. But revolutions are rarely clean, and the path to freedom is often paved with blood. We delve into the darkest chapter of this story, a period where the ideals of the revolution were twisted into a weapon of mass destruction. The year is 1793. The air in Paris is thick with tension. King Louis XVI, now stripped of his title and known simply as Citizen Louis Capet, stands trial for treason. The verdict was almost a foregone conclusion. For the revolution to live, the king had to die. On a cold January morning, Louis was led to the scaffold. As the blade of the guillotine fell, a roar erupted from the crowd. Some dipped their handkerchiefs in his blood, a grim souvenir of the monarchy's final breath. 9 months later, his wife, Marie Antoinette, met the same fate. The hated Austrian queen, once the symbol of royal excess, was paraded through the streets in an open cart, her dignity stripped away, before she too faced the national razor. The executions of the king and queen sent shockwaves across Europe. The monarchies of Austria, Prussia, Britain, and Spain, horrified by the regicide, formed the first coalition. Their armies amassed on France's borders, determined to crush the infant republic and restore order. The threat was existential. France was surrounded, isolated, and fighting for its very survival. The revolutionary government declared a state of emergency. A levée en masse, a mass conscription, was enacted, drafting all able-bodied men into the army. The nation was at total war, and the pressure cooker was about to explode. Faced with foreign invasion and internal rebellions, the National Convention created a new body with unprecedented power, the Committee of Public Safety. Initially intended to defend the nation, it quickly became the engine of the terror, and at its heart was one of the revolution's most iconic and controversial figures, Maximilien Robespierre. Known as the Incorruptible for his unwavering dedication to his principles, Robespierre was a lawyer who believed that terror was a necessary evil. In his own chilling words, terror is nothing more than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. He argued that to save the Republic from its enemies, both foreign and domestic, virtue had to be armed with fear. Under Robespierre's guidance, paranoia became state policy. The law of suspects was passed, allowing for the arrest of anyone who, by their conduct, associations, comments, or writings, showed themselves to be supporters of tyranny or federalism and enemies of liberty. The definition was so vague that no one was safe. A careless word, a noble-sounding name, or a complaint about the price of bread could be enough to earn you a one-way trip to the guillotine. Revolutionary tribunals were set up to process the accused. These were not courts of justice but courts of condemnation. The trials were swift, the defense was often non-existent, and the only possible outcomes were acquittal or death. And overwhelmingly, it was death. The guillotine, once hailed as a humane method of execution, became the symbol of the terror's relentless machinery. It stood in the Place de la Révolution, now the Place de la Concorde, its blade rising and falling day after day. At the height of the terror, dozens could be executed in a single afternoon. The tumbrils, the wooden carts carrying the condemned, became a daily spectacle. People grew numb to the sight of death. Among the first victims were the Girondins, the moderate faction of the revolution, purged for not being radical enough. Then came aristocrats, priests, and royalists. But soon the revolution began to devour its own. Danton, a fiery orator and once a leading revolutionary himself, was sent to the scaffold, accused of being too lenient. He prophetically told the executioner, "Show my head to the people, it is worth seeing." The radicalism wasn't just political, it was social and cultural. The revolutionaries sought to remake society from the ground up, to erase every trace of the old regime. This crusade against the past was known as de-Christianization. Churches were ransacked, their bells melted down for cannons, religious icons were destroyed. A new secular calendar was introduced, renaming the months and starting from year 1 of the Republic. The most extreme expression of this was the cult of reason. In a bizarre ceremony at the Notre Dame Cathedral, which was rededicated as a temple of reason, an actress was enthroned as the goddess of reason. This was too much even for Robespierre, who, despite his radicalism, was a deist. He saw atheism as a moral void and introduced his own alternative, the cult of the supreme being, a civic religion that acknowledged a creator but rejected the rituals of Catholicism. It was a clear sign of his growing messianic complex. The terror was a vortex of fear and suspicion. Neighbors informed on neighbors, children testified against their parents. In the provinces, the repression was even more brutal. In Lyon, where a counter-revolution had been crushed, the committee's representative declared that the guillotine was too slow. The condemned were lined up in front of open graves and mowed down with cannon fire. In the Vendée region, where a Catholic and royalist army rose in rebellion, thousands were drowned in the Loire River in what were called Republican baptisms. It's estimated that up to 40,000 people were officially executed during the Reign of Terror. Hundreds of thousands more died in the civil wars or perished in overcrowded, disease-ridden prisons. What had started as a quest for liberty had mutated into a ruthless dictatorship, justified by the very ideals it claimed to protect. But a regime built on fear cannot last forever. The constant executions exhausted the populace. The victories of the French army on the battlefield made the extreme measures of the Committee of Public Safety seem less necessary. Robespierre's power had made him isolated and feared by his own colleagues. He had purged the ultra-radicals to his left and the moderates to his right. Now, the remaining members of the convention looked at him and wondered who would be next. The breaking point came in July 1794. Robespierre gave a speech in which he claimed to have a new list of traitors, but he refused to name them. This was a fatal mistake. Panicked for their own lives, his opponents organized against him. The next day, when he tried to speak, he was shouted down with cries of "Down with the tyrant." He and his closest allies were arrested. In a final, ironic twist of fate, Maximilien Robespierre, the architect of the terror, found himself condemned by the very revolutionary justice he had created. He was taken to the Place de la Révolution, to the same guillotine that had silenced so many of his opponents. As his head fell, a cheer went up from the crowd, a cheer not of revolutionary fervor, but of profound relief. The reign of terror was over. The Thermidorian reaction, as it came to be known, began. The pendulum swung back. The radicals were purged, the prisons were opened, and a shell-shocked France tried to find its way back from the brink. The revolution had survived, but at a terrible cost. It had shown the world the terrifying power of ideology when untethered from humanity. As we witnessed the rise of a young, ambitious general who would pick up the pieces of the shattered republic and forge an empire in its place, Napoleon Bonaparte. The revolution is dead. Long live the revolution. The guillotine, once the symbol of revolutionary justice, now claimed its own architect. The crowd that once cheered for Robespierre's purges now roared for his demise. In July 1794, the incorruptible met the same fate as thousands he had condemned. The reign of terror was finally over, but the soul of France was deeply wounded. The nation was exhausted, bled dry by years of internal conflict and external wars. The revolution, born from a desperate cry for liberty, had descended into a paranoid bloodbath. Now, with Robespierre gone, A collective sigh of relief swept through Paris. But what comes after chaos? The fall of Robespierre didn't bring instant stability. Instead, it ushered in a new phase of the revolution, the Directory. This 5-man executive committee was meant to be a moderate government, a middle ground between the monarchy of the past and the radicalism of the Jacobins. But in reality, it was a period of rampant corruption, political infighting, and crippling economic instability. The rich flaunted their wealth in extravagant parties, while the poor continued to starve. The government was weak, lurching from one crisis to the next, unable to command respect or enforce its laws effectively. The French people, having sacrificed so much, were disillusioned. They longed for order, for a strong leader who could end the chaos and restore France's glory. The political stage was a vacuum, and as the old saying goes, nature abhors a vacuum. While the politicians in Paris bickered and schemed, a new power was rising on the battlefields of Europe, the French army. Forged in the fires of the Revolutionary Wars, this was no longer the army of the king. It was a meritocracy, where talent and bravery, not noble birth, determined promotion. It was a national army, filled with patriotic citizens fighting for the idea of France itself. And from this crucible of war, a new class of charismatic and ambitious generals emerged. They were heroes to the public, their victories a source of national pride in a time of domestic failure. The army became a state within a state, powerful and increasingly independent from the weak Directory in Paris. The stage was set for a man who could command not just troops, but the heart of the nation. And that man was Napoleon Bonaparte. A young Corsican general of minor nobility, his meteoric rise was the stuff of legend. His brilliant campaigns in Italy and his daring expedition to Egypt captured the public imagination. He was seen as a genius, a savior, the embodiment of revolutionary meritocracy. While the Directory grew more and more unpopular, Napoleon's star shone ever brighter. He was decisive where they were indecisive, victorious where they were failing. He understood the deep yearning of the French people for stability and glory. In 1799, seeing his moment, Napoleon returned from Egypt, hailed as a hero. The political elite, desperate for a strong man to protect them from both royalist and Jacobin threats, thought they could use him. They were wrong. On the 18th of Brumaire, or November 9, 1799, Napoleon executed a masterful coup d'état. With the help of his brother Lucien and loyal grenadiers, he stormed the legislative chambers, dissolving the Directory with a show of military force. There was no widespread resistance. France was too tired to fight anymore. Napoleon declared, "Citizens, the revolution is established on the principles with which it began. It is over." He established a new government, the consulate, with himself as first consul. In reality, he was a dictator. The 10-year saga of revolution, of liberty, equality, and fraternity had come to an end. The man who claimed to be the heir of the revolution would soon crown himself emperor. So, how do we make sense of this incredible journey? The French Revolution began with a demand for freedom and ended with an emperor. Was it all a failure? Not at all. The revolution was a messy, violent, and contradictory event, but its legacy is undeniable. It completely shattered the old feudal order of Europe. It proved that a nation could overthrow a king and remake itself from the ground up. The ideas of popular sovereignty, human rights, and nationalism, unleashed by the revolution, would spread across the globe and shape the course of the next 2 centuries. Napoleon himself, while an autocrat, would preserve and export many of the revolution's reforms. A unified legal code, centralized administration, and educational advancement across his vast empire. The revolution showed the world the incredible power of ordinary people to change history, but it also served as a terrifying warning about the dangers of radical ideology, mob violence, and the descent from idealism into terror. It's a story of human greatness and human folly, of the highest aspirations and the darkest impulses. From the storming of the Bastille to the rise of Napoleon, it remains one of the most important and fascinating chapters in human history. It taught us that fighting for liberty is a noble cause, but that the path from chaos to order is often perilous, and the desire for a strong leader can be a powerful and dangerous force. The shadow of the revolution and the emperor it created still looms over the modern world. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the French Revolution. It's been an epic tale, and I've only just scratched the surface. If you enjoyed this and want to dive deeper into other pivotal moments in history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Let me know in the comments what you found most fascinating about the revolution or what you'd like to see me cover next. Your support means the world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.